Hi everyone, our third F2 round at Circuit de Gilles Villeneuve in Montreal is done and dusted. There was plenty of excitement to be had, and I have no other series updates to share, so we can get straight into the action. Our tyre compounds for the weekend are the softs and the super softs. Starting with practice, Gabriele Mini gets pushed out of the fast lane in the pits by the marshals, and misses 15 minutes of the 45-minute session while MP resolved the issue. As he got back out on track within the session, we're not going to log this one as a technical retirement. Bennett tests out the braking for the turn 10 hairpin and gets into the runoff. We're going to get very familiar with this corner as the video goes on. There's a close call with Rotoma Miata on a push lap as Lawrence Van Hoopen tries to get some heat into his tyres down the straight. Van Hoopen gets a great lap following the incident, but is noted for impeding. Kush Miney has a big lock-up trying to dive down the inside of Nico Varone, and the two of them jostle further down the lap. This was some pretty shifty behaviour, and Miney gets investigated for erratic driving, but only gets a reprimand rather than a penalty. With one of his super soft sets ruined, Miney pits for a second set. They only get 3 super softs provided for the whole weekend, so it was a bold move to use 2 sets in practice. Dino Beganovic is still figuring out his braking points and has to dive over the final chicane. There's a short yellow flag for Sebastian Montoya taking a spin, but he self-corrects and rejoins the track. Mini finally gets on track and is investigated for impeding Taz Intrapuvac at turn 5, but is only issued a warning by the stewards. Rafa Kamara also takes the runoff for the final chicane. Noel Leon is investigated for impeding Van Hoopen at turn 3, but also only gets a warning. Rafa Villagomez is first blood for the Wall of Champions, only losing a front wing end plate. Miney finishes practice early, presumably to save what's left of his super soft tyres for quali in the feature race. Alex Dunn locks up at the turn 10 hairpin. Intrapuvac gets very close to the Wall of Champions, but escapes without taking damage. Colton Herter takes a spin at turn 2. Varone comes to a stop on the final straight, our first technical retirement, at least occurring towards the end of the session, so he has plenty of track time. Mini almost brushes the Wall of Champions, really testing the limits of how much they can push through the final turn. Next up is qualifying. Dunn has a very borderline moment at the start of his lap, but still somehow sets a great time early in the session. By the halfway mark, it's been largely uneventful and everyone's times were super close. At some point, Dunn was impeding Kamara and received a 3-place grid penalty to both the sprint and the feature races. Kamara was also given a 3-place grid penalty for both the sprint and the feature races for impeding Villagomez. Eventually, the inevitable happens with someone pushing the limits, and Ollie Goethe obliterates his right rear suspension on the Wall of Champions, otherwise managing to prevent his car from being destroyed. A red flag is called with a little more than 8 minutes left on the clock. The stewards clear the car quickly, so we don't have much of a delay. Goethe loses his best time for causing the red flag. When we get back on track, Intrapuvac eats the wall at turn 4 on his first push lap. No one gets a push lap finish before the red flag is called again, with just over 5 minutes of quali left. He was sitting in 5th place at the time, his best result yet. Disappointing for him to have the time deleted as prime cause for the red flag. Kamara reports to Invicta that he tapped the wall at turn 4 with his right rear. There's an absolute scramble as the team get to work replacing the damaged part of his suspension, managing to get it fixed and back together in time for the green flag. We get some rapid-fire changes to the top times, with the Campos and Roden pairs having turns sitting in 1-2. Dirksen taps the wall at turn 9 on his final lap, and Beganovic doesn't manage to get another push lap locked in, leaving him well out of place in 14th. Our final times are confirmed with Van Hoopen in first, and Kamara and Dunn taking the second and third best times before their grid drops are applied. John Bennett and Emerson Fittipaldi Jr. claim their best starting positions yet. Next up, we've made it to the sprint race. Following his crash in quali, Intrapuvac opted to withdraw from the remainder of the weekend on a medical stand-down. Dunn and Varone get investigated for an infringement as they were out of place as they passed the safety car line going past the pit exit on the formation lap. Varone gets a stop-go penalty, but Dunn gets nothing. I found this a bit odd because they're both out of place, so surely if one gets the penalty, both do. As they fire off, Mini gets an excellent start and Dirksen passes Bennett, Villagomez and shoves past Leon to get into second. Dirksen later gets given a 5-second penalty for the collision. By lap 2, Dirksen and Leon go wheel-to-wheel down the final straight with Leon reclaiming second place. For lap 3, Villagomez is right on Dirksen's tail, and Montoya spins at turn 9 but saves it and rejoins the track. For lap 4, Dirksen repasses Leon before the final chicane. On lap 6, Solov passes Varone at the turn 10 hairpin, but Varone chases him down the straight and takes the place back. For lap 7, Kamara and Beganovic begin making things difficult for each other. we start getting some long DRS trains across the field. On lap 8, Leon passes Dirksen at turn 2. As they cross the line for lap 10, Verone comes into the pits to serve his stop-go penalty, and Van Amersfoort sent him back out on track without a delay. He gets pinged for not serving the penalty correctly, but upon review it's noted that race control didn't specify the time required to stop, so no additional penalty is applied. He comes back out on track in P21. Verone's stop-go promotes Fittipaldi into a points-paying position. At the turn 10 hairpin, Bennett gets spun by Martinius Stenchorn, who was defending from Nikola Solov. Solov later earns a 10-second penalty for the collision. His right front wing end plate gets a trim, and he may have also sustained damage to his right front wheel. On lap 11, Solov is still right behind Stenchorn. The safety car is called for Bennett after almost a whole lap. On lap 15, as we go green, Leon attacks Mini immediately, but Mini holds his ground. There's a three-way fight at the turn 10 hairpin between Villagomez, Dirksen and Leon. Dirksen eventually makes a move to get past Villagomez at the final chicane, but does so off track. Invicta instruct him to return the position. Stenchorn runs over the grass. By lap 16, Dirksen repasses Solov on the final chicane. Lap 17, Leon is not making life easy for Mini, and Solov dives down the inside of Dirksen on the turn 10 hairpin. By lap 18, the DRS train extends from Villagomez in P3 all the way back to Verone in P20. Dirksen goes for a spin at turn 10 with the help of Dunn. Dunn eventually gets a 10-second penalty for the collision. Leon completes his long-awaited pass on Mini at the final chicane. On lap 19, a yellow flag is waved to retrieve Dirksen's car and another very long wait before finally calling the safety car. Dirksen makes a somewhat harebrained decision to approach the track as the pack roll by under safety car in order to point accusingly at Dunn. This is the kind of thing I'm used to seeing at dirt track races, so it's funny to see it happening at posh races too. Unsurprisingly, Dirksen gets reprimanded for approaching an active racetrack. Also, as he had a 5-second penalty owing for the lap 1 incident, but DNF'd before either serving it or crossing the finish line and having it applied, it gets changed to a 3-place grid drop for the feature race. During the safety car, Miney and Kian Shields pit for super softs. By lap 22, we're back to green and Leon gets a good start. Solov loses a place to Dunn. On lap 25, Beganovic passes Dam's teammate Roman Belinsky. Stenchorn skips over the grass between turns 1 and 2, failing to pass Villagomez. Dunn capitalizes on his teammate's mistake and passes Stenchorn here too. Villagomez crashes into the wall at turn 4. A VSC is called, which is lucky for those with outstanding penalties, not having the grid bunched up behind a full safety car. Before the VSC was in place, Van Amersfoort really locks in the bad race this lap. Further back in the field in 15th and 16th places, the two Pramers were playing what should have been the least consequential game of DRS chicken around the turn 10 hairpin. What they didn't seem aware of was that behind them, Verone was in the process of passing Shields for 17th position. As Verone exited the turn, he was forced to slow behind the braking car of Mari Boya, who should have been accelerating. Now behind Verone, Shields has no view of the situation unfolding just ahead and rammed into the back of Verone as he was forced to unexpectedly brake. This was all baffling to watch. Understandably, Boya has been handed a post-race 10-second penalty for driving unnecessarily slowly. As Verone was more than 10 seconds behind him over the line, he maintains his 15th place finish. Notably not a grid drop for the upcoming feature race. It was also acknowledged by the stewards that they went easy on him with only 1 point on his license for the incident, being a new offence. He got off very lightly. Montoya's slowdown was also reviewed, but wasn't penalised as it was deemed that his was a delayed response to what Boya was doing, so his car wasn't slowing as much. All this over 15th place in a sprint race. Shields pulls into the pit lane to retire. On lap 27, the VSC ends, and Leon has built a lead over nearly 4 seconds. Kamara passes Belinsky, and Dunn is hot on the heels of Mini. Lap 18, Montoya pulls into the pit lane, and Dunn finally passes Mini before the final chicane. Our podium for this race is Noel Leon in first, Gabriele Mini in second, and Martinius Stenchorn in third. A phenomenal drive from Leon for his maiden F2 win, and an overdue podium for Stenchorn. Dunn and Solov dropped to positions 13th and 14th respectively with their penalties applied, having crossed the line in 2nd and 5th. The big surprise of this one is the 4 points won by Fittipaldi getting a 5th place finish. Now it's time for the feature race. Remember, we have 3-place grid drops for Dunn, Kamara and Dirksen for this one. There's a slight threat of rain for the race, but everyone is on slick tyres. Our alternate strategy drivers starting on the softs are Miney, Belinsky and Boya. I will note that it was cold on track for this race, which comes into play later with some of our tyre changes. Straight into the action on lap 1, Sullivan Van Hoopen trade passes for the lead immediately. Belinsky trims the right front wing end plate off Fittipaldi as he clatters over a curb. On lap 2, Leon is sandwiched between the two Invictors, not able to get past Kamara. Dirksen gets past him in the next lap. Villagomez has a big pass on Bennett and we get reports of drips of rain on parts of the track. On lap 3, Kamara starts closing in on Mini, but has to dash over the last chicane. For lap 4, finally completing the move, Kamara squeezes past Mini at turn 1. Dirksen also tries to chase down Mini, but instead falls back into the clutches of Leon. Van Hoopen takes a hard hit from the Wall of Champions as he attempts to defend his lead from Solov. A sad end to what was shaping up to be another great battle for the lead between the pair. The safety car is out on lap 5. Due to the location of the crash, the safety car laps are taken via the pit lane. On lap 7, the safety car ends and Fittipaldi comes into the pits to swap to his softs. Not sure if he also had his front wing fixed. As we cross the line for lap 8, Emerson Fittipaldi is the first of our drivers to have a nightmare trying to fire out of the pits on a cold set of new tyres. He skidded into the wall at turn 2 as he was coming out of the pit lane exit. On lap 9, Stenchon closes the gap to Solov. The safety car is finally called and most of the pack pours into the pits. Our non-pitters are Belinsky, Varone, Colton Herta, Miney and Boyer. Notably, Varone and Herta are on the primary strategy with the super soft tyres on. In the pit lane, Bennett, who is sitting in P4, gets released into the path of Villagomez and then has to retire the car with right front suspension damage. A disappointing end to what was otherwise looking to be a really great weekend for Trident. On lap 10, Varone comes into the pits and it's looking like the one-lap split was to avoid a double stack. Conversely, Invicta did double stack and Dirksen is well down the field. On lap 13, we're back to race pace again. Belinsky gets a great start and pulls away from Herta. Solov attacks Boyer into turns 1 and 2, but Stenchon uses the distraction to pass them both. Solov gets past Boyer in the next turn. Beganovic is side by side with Kamara in the run-up to turn 10, but fails to make the pass on him, with Kamara successfully blocking him throughout the rest of the lap. The stewards reviewed the turn 10 incident and Kamara missed the apex and made contact with Beganovic, netting himself a 5-second penalty. By lap 14, Solov tries to make a move on Stenchon down the inside of turn 1, but Stenchon holds him off. Further along the lap, Stenchon gets past Miney on the inside of turn 10. Solov passes Miney down the final straight, but with Miney so close behind at the braking zone, Solov takes some contact and does a 180 spin into the grass runoff, rejoining in P16. On lap 15, Kamara passes Boyer in his favourite spot, going around turns 1 and 2. At the same time, Beganovic tried to go around the outside of Boyer on turn 2 and is wheel-to-wheel with him down the straight, eventually conceding by turn 3. At some point on lap 16, Leon drops down the timing tower and we never get a report about what happened. Stenchon gets past Colton Herta. On lap 17, Kamara makes yet another turns 1 and 2 pass, this time on the inside of Villagomez. He clips Villagomez's left front wing end plate and gives him some left front suspension damage, causing Villagomez to drop down the order and park up near a track exit. A yellow flag is waved. There are never any investigations regarding this incident, so presumably the stewards just deemed this a racing incident. By lap 18, a VSC is called, but it's a quick retrieval for the marshals to just pull the car back into a safe position behind the barrier. We're back to green very soon. Kamara loses a place to Beganovic on the final chicane, and Stenchon closes the gap to Belinsky. On lap 19, as Belinsky goes wide into the turn 10 runoff, he gets passed by Stenchon and Herta. Stenchon claims a comfortable race lead well ahead of Beganovic, our effective second place, and drives off into the distance. By lap 20, Beganovic passes Belinsky inside turn 1 and gets past Herta before the end of the lap. Kamara also makes a pass on Belinsky at the final chicane, but Belinsky dodges into the runoff and for whatever reason decides to hold the position as he rejoins ahead of Kamara. Belinsky gets a 10-second penalty for leaving the track and gaining an advantage. Returning the position would have prevented the lap 23 incident, which we'll get into in a little bit. On lap 21, Shields locks up into turn 10 and gets passed by Miney and Ritomo Miata. I'm not 100% sure where it happened, as it's not super clear on the broadcast, but watching them in the background down the straight, I think this was when Solov cut the final chicane defending from Goethe. Solov ends up getting a 10-second post-race penalty applied. On lap 22, Mini is right on the tail of Kamara at the turn 8-9 chicane. Solov dives over the final chicane runoff while fighting Montoya. On lap 23, Kamara tries his turn 1 and 2 classic on Belinsky, but doesn't have enough room by turn 2 and goes for a big spin. He rejoins and ends up at the rear of the field. Mini, having gained a free place, starts bearing down on Belinsky. Kamara pits with intention to retire the car, but we get an interesting peek behind the curtain with a broadcast radio message that I don't think we're typically privy to. Kamara sounded very much ready to hang up his gloves for the weekend, but was essentially forced by Invicta back onto the track to serve any pending penalties the stewards were reviewing. This proved to be a good judgment by the team, as it saved him from a feature race grid drop at Monaco with the 5-second penalty for the turn 10 Beganovic collision. Where I'm from, there's a phrase when someone helps you out in a tricky situation: give that man a chocolate fish, sometimes followed up by buying them a marshmallow fish covered in chocolate. Between fixing his left rear suspension on the fly and saving him from a Monaco grid drop, I think Kamara owes the Invicta team all chocolate fish. On lap 24, Beganovic's car starts smoking as he takes the turn 10 hairpin. A train of cars passed Belinsky down the final straight, so perhaps he was nursing damage from Kamara's attempt to pass, or maybe his tyres had hit their limit. On lap 25, Dunn passes Mini inside the turn 10 hairpin. There's another unexplained incident where Herta and Boyer both drop 2 places down the timing tower. Presumably something occurred at turn 10. Mini repasses Dunn down the final straight, and Herta dashes into the pits with a very old set of super softs. On lap 26, Boyer drops some more places. At turn 10, Dirksen hits the rear of Ritomo Miata, causing him to spin. Dirksen earns a 10-second penalty for the collision. Dunn again passes Mini on the final straight. By lap 27, Beganovic drops down the order as his car fails. He pulls over to the side of the track and walks away, head in hands. It was a repeat of what happened to him only 2 rounds earlier in Melbourne. The safety car is called, and Belinsky and Boyer make their mandatory pit stops. Leon comes in for an extra stop, presumably to try and get a tyre advantage for the rest of the race. Leon gets a 5-second penalty for speeding in the pit lane, so I'm not sure the gamble paid off. Boyer gets his version of the cold tyre experience like Fittipaldi did earlier in the race, but manages to keep it out of the barrier. Kamara rejoins the field to roll around the track and serve his penalty. Dunn radios in suggesting to Rodin that he and Stenchon work together at the front of the pack to get away from the rest of the field. My biggest takeaway from this was learning that Dunn refers to Stenchon as horny. Lap 30, Miney checks in with ART as to why he's still out on his ancient set of softs, and they report back that they're waiting for rain. We're back to green flag conditions on lap 34. Solov's pass genuinely made me lean back in shock. Race car drivers are just built different. Us normies wouldn't even consider making the risks they do with braking distances and passes, let alone possess the reflexes needed to prevent getting tangled in crashes or making snap decisions about car placement for a late pass. At this point, and it felt very late for them to be informing us about this decision, we swapped from a total race distance to remaining time plus 1 lap. By the time they advise us of the change, we have 3 minutes and 17 seconds left on the clock. During the 3-minute mark, we get a yellow flag called as we have a rough crash at the turn 10 exit, where Miata and Goethe got side by side, with Goethe getting tapped, causing his car to spin in front of Miata. Miney finally gets called into the pits and the safety car comes out. Miata pits for a new front wing, and Goethe is stranded at the start of the final straight. We end the race under safety car conditions, but that's certainly not to take anything away from Stenchon's race. He's very much been due a good result, with some terrible luck taking him out of the feature races in the previous 2 rounds. Solov crossed the line in 4th, but dropped to 12th with the penalty from his incident with Goethe applied. With so many of our typical frontrunners copping penalties or eating some bad luck, we have an interesting group of drivers in our points finishers. The key to the feature race was really just keeping your head down and your nose clean. Shields gets his best ever F2 result and leapfrogs up 5 places in the championship standings. Now, I previously decided against naming this segment Movers and Breakers as I thought it was too cheesy. I've been thinking about it, and I'm not afraid of cheese. So, welcome to the Movers and Breakers segment. Starting with our movers for the weekend, a serious chunk of these are inherited places from the feature, but there's definitely something to be said for having a clean race and getting across the finish line without a penalty over your head. Colton Herta moved up 22 places fairly evenly across the 2 races, whereas the Premers of Muddy Boyer and Sebastian Montoya capitalised on the feature race madness. Despite his DNF in the feature race, Ollie Goethe outlasted enough of the other race retirements to move up the order, and also put in some serious work during the sprint. Now for the weekend's breakers. There were much fewer technical retirements compared to our previous event at Miami. Nico Varone didn't make it back to the pit lane at the end of practice, instead parking up along one of the straights. Beganovic had to relive a repeat of his feature race slow to a stop from round 1 after working his way up the field. He dragged it around the circuit for 3 laps as it smoked. You could see the frustration as he walked away from the car. Dams is easily our unluckiest team so far. Here are our current championship standings. Mini has pulled further into the lead over Kamara, and Solov has dropped to 3rd equal with no points for the weekend's efforts. Stenchon has absolutely skyrocketed from all the way down into 17th into contention, sitting alongside Solov for 3rd. which just goes to show how many contenders there can still be with many more rounds to go. If your favourites are flagging, have faith. There's plenty of time to stage a big comeback regardless of where they're currently placed. Our very much missed F3 drivers finally had some seat time at Red Bull Ring a few weeks ago. Ernesto Rivera finally getting an opportunity to get onto a track, having been recovering from an injury earlier in the year and missing the first round in Melbourne. Christian Ho wasn't able to attend due to academic commitments, so Gennaro Trappa, current Euro Cup 3 driver, stepped into Ho's seat at Roden for the test. On day 1, Ugo Ugochukwu just squeaked ahead of Tuka Tappinen, Noah Stromstead and Freddie Slater. Kanato Lee and Jose Garfias both spun off track in the morning, and Stromstead slowed to a stop in the afternoon session. We had some even closer times on day 2, with our top 10 drivers just over 3.5 tenths apart. Taito Kato came to a stop, only to get back on track later in the same session and set the fastest time for the whole day. Michael Shin and James Wharton also came to a stop, and Brando Badoer had a spin. No dramas for the afternoon, but the times are all notably slower, with long runs being the main focus. The fastest of the afternoon was Brad Benavides, and it wasn't enough to break into the top 20 of the morning session. Another wildly entertaining race weekend with F2 at Montreal. I'm hoping as we get into the European races, the drivers will be more familiar with the tracks, and we'll have smaller car graveyards and more drivers crossing the finish line. I'm a little behind where I'd like to be with getting these updates out, and with the busy European stint looming for F2 and F3, I'll do my best to get a bit more efficient. Next time we'll be racing with both F2 and F3 at Monaco, which is actually fun when you're watching smaller cars. Please subscribe and I'll see you in the next video where I'll hopefully be recapping some high stakes passes.